is incoming.
So I said, fine. And we walked out back and it was the world, as you saw.
From the Oscars to a whirlwind of lawsuits, Cuba Gooding Jr. is facing the biggest storm of his life. The star who once shouted, "Show me the money" on the Oscar stage now appears on the front pages of newspapers for a very different reason. More than 30 accusations of inappropriate behavior toward women have shaken Hollywood to its core. A lavish yacht party has even been mentioned in Sean Diddy Combs' case files. The star who once walked proudly on the red carpet now bowed his head as he walked out of a New York police station. A painful fall. Hollywood is stunned. Audiences are shocked. Cuba Gooding Jr., once a Hollywood icon, now stands on the brink of losing everything: his career, his reputation, and the legacy he worked so hard to build. The only question that remains: will Cuba Gooding Jr. overcome this storm, or be swept away by it? Before the scandals, Cuba Gooding Jr. was the living embodiment of the American dream. A black boy from the streets carrying the music of his famous father within him, slowly turning his dream of cinema into reality. Cuba Gooding Jr. was born in 1968 in the Bronx, one of New York's most notorious neighborhoods. But instead of dark alleys and the wail of police sirens, the Gooding household was always filled with music. His father, Cuba Gooding Sr., was the lead singer of the legendary soul group The Main Ingredient, whose smash hit "Everybody Plays the Fool" dominated the Billboard charts in the 1970s. But that childhood was far from a bed of roses. His parents divorced, and the family often struggled. Gooding Jr. once shared that there were nights when he had to sleep on the streets drifting across California. In California, Gooding Jr. attended 4 different high schools. Constantly changing schools made his youth turbulent, but it also gave him an incredible ability to adapt a skill that would later become a major advantage on screen. After high school, Gooding Jr. studied acting in small classes in Los Angeles, landing a few minor roles in commercials and TV shows. It was a period filled with auditions that almost never led to jobs. To survive during those failures, he worked as a waiter, a security guard, and at times even slept in his car. But then the golden opportunity arrived. In 1990, John Singleton, a young black director preparing for his debut project, Boys and the Hood, Cuba Gooding Jr. heard about the casting and showed up. With no money and no connections, he brought nothing but raw energy, fire, and the scars of his childhood to the audition. Singleton later recalled, "When Cuba walked in, I saw the truth. He wasn't acting, he was Trey." Gooding Jr. beat out hundreds of hopefuls to win the role of Trey Styles, a role that would change his life forever. Who would go watch a story about young black men in South Central Los Angeles? But the film proved everyone wrong. It became a social statement. Boys in the Hood was a resounding success, earning an Oscar nomination and later being preserved in the U.S. Library of Congress as a work of historical and cultural significance. For Gooding Jr., it was the turning point. From an unknown actor, he became the face of an entire generation of young black men yearning to be heard. If Boys in the Hood was his ticket into Hollywood, then Jerry Maguire 1996 was the rocket that launched him to the top. Jerry Maguire, the golden statue that changed everything. In Cameron Crowe's film, he played Rod Tidwell, a football player full of personality, fiery but lovable, desperate to be recognized. The moment Rod shouted into the phone, "Show me the money," the whole world remembered it. The line became a pop culture phenomenon, repeated on television, in gyms, even on sports fields. At the 1997 Oscars, when Cuba Gooding Jr.'s name was called for Best Supporting Actor, the entire room erupted. Gooding leapt into the air, shouted, stretched out his arms as if to embrace the world. Live television captured the unforgettable moment as he laughed, cried, gave thanks, and even danced on stage. It wasn't just an acceptance speech. It was a performance, a burst of energy forever etched into Oscar history. From a boy who once slept on the streets, Gooding Jr. now stood on Hollywood's highest stage. It was the American dream, vivid and complete. But Hollywood is ruthless. It's a place that creates legends, yet just as quickly grinds them to dust. A few wrong choices are enough to snuff out the spotlight. And for Gooding Jr., those mistakes came one after another. When the spotlight faded, In 2002, he signed on for Snow Dogs, a family film about sled dogs. Critics tore it apart. Rotten Tomatoes gave it less than 20%, and the press sneered, "This isn't an Oscar star, this is just a high-class dog sitter." That same year, Gooding Jr. stumbled again with Boat Trip. If Snow Dogs was merely a disappointment, Boat Trip was labeled a disaster slammed for its shallow plot and awkward performances. But the harshest blow came with Daddy Day Camp 2007. This wasn't just another flop. The film scored a shocking 1% on Rotten Tomatoes and landed on lists of the worst films of the decade. The man who once lit up the Oscar stage was now starring in something audiences openly mocked as a joke. Critics showed no mercy. Rolling Stone wrote Cuba Gooding Jr. from Golden Statue to Bargain Bin DVD. Audiences turned their backs. Big studios no longer trusted him with serious roles. Meanwhile, a new generation of actors, Will Smith, Denzel Washington, Jamie Foxx, were all on the rise. In just 5 years, Gooding Jr. went from Hollywood's golden face to a cautionary tale of its brutality, how glory can vanish faster than a camera flash on the red carpet. But fading from the screen was painful enough. As Cuba struggled to salvage his career, real life hurled at him an even darker nightmare. Arrests, accusations, and an endless string of lawsuits. The Oscar-winning name became the centerpiece of a real-life tragedy. The legal storm. When scandal overshadowed the screen, that fateful night in Manhattan. June 13, 2019. The Magic Hour rooftop bar and lounge in New York was buzzing as usual. Just a few blocks from Times Square, the spot was known for its luxury setting, strong cocktails, and wild nightlife. Amid the glittering lights, Cuba Gooding Jr. appeared the Oscar-winning star, flashing the familiar smile that once charmed millions of fans. But that night didn't end with music and wine. A woman reported to police that Gooding Jr. had touched her without consent. Only hours later, he was arrested in Manhattan. The moment was described by the press as a lightning bolt striking Hollywood. Reuters, ABC News, and countless outlets broke the headline, "Oscar winner arrested in Manhattan." The image of the man who once celebrated joyfully on the Oscar stage, now walking out of a police station with his head bowed surrounded by cameras, became a symbol of a devastating fall. From one incident to a storm of allegations. At first, Gooding Jr. denied the accusation. His lawyer called it a misunderstanding during a party. But as the news spread, something no one expected began to unfold. More women came forward. The second, the third, the 10th. The numbers rose like dominoes falling. Within just a few months, more than 30 women stepped up, alleging that Cuba Gooding Jr. had engaged in inappropriate behavior in a variety of places. Bars, clubs, upscale restaurants, even social events. El País, the Los Angeles Times, and many other international outlets reported their accounts describing unwanted touching, non-consensual kisses, and other uninvited contact. Only 3 of those cases met the legal threshold to proceed in court, but the number 30 was enough to shake Hollywood to its core. The headlines were merciless. From Oscar glory to public shame. The fall of Cuba. Gooding Jr., once a star who embodied aspiration and success. Gooding Jr. now found himself at the center of an unprecedented storm. 3 years after that shocking Manhattan arrest, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s name once again dominated the headlines. But this time, it wasn't blurry photos from a bar at night. It was the image of him standing before a judge in New York criminal court. Dozens of cameras fixed on every expression of a face once so familiar on the Oscar red carpet. A shocking moment in court. Cuba Gooding Jr. bows his head and pleads guilty. 2022. On April 13, 2022, Gooding Jr. appeared in court wearing a dark suit. The dazzling smile was gone. He quietly bowed his head. At his side stood his team of lawyers. Across from him were the prosecutors and witnesses in an atmosphere thick with tension. The prosecutor announced that out of more than 30 accusations, 3 cases had enough legal grounds to proceed. The most serious dated back to 2018 when he was accused of touching a waitress at Tao downtown without her consent. Gooding Jr.'s lawyers insisted it was simply a misunderstanding during drinking, but the evidence and testimony made the situation increasingly impossible to defend. The media called it a courtroom drama, a stage where a once celebrated star was now fighting desperately to salvage the last shred of his dignity. When the judge asked him directly, The entire courtroom fell silent. Gooding Jr., as voice dropped far from the lively tone audiences once knew. On the big screen, I kissed the waitress on her lips without consent. That short, clear statement ended 3 years of denial. For the public, it rang like a confession to the entire world. Major outlets like ABC News, Reuters, and The Guardian all ran the headline, "Cuba Gooding Jr. pleads guilty." The Oscar winner admits to inappropriate conduct. Though he pleaded guilty, Gooding Jr. secured a special deal with the court. He was required to complete 6 months of alcohol treatment, attend mandatory behavior counseling sessions, and avoid any further violations during probation. If he fulfilled all conditions, the criminal charge would be reduced to a misdemeanor harassment offense, meaning no criminal record. It was considered an escape hatch from prison, but one that came with a devastating price, his reputation forever stained. As The Hollywood Reporter put it, he escaped prison bars, but not the judgment of public opinion. Public backlash. Right after the trial, social media exploded. Some argued that Gooding Jr. had finally taken responsibility, better late than never. But the majority of the public saw it as cowardly compromise, pleading guilty to secure freedom, rather than fighting to the end to prove innocence. One victim told the Los Angeles Times, "The worst part isn't what he did. It's the feeling that justice was bought." The shockwaves continue. The 2022 trial didn't close the storm. It was merely a pause in the chaos. Though he avoided prison, Cuba Gooding Jr. now lived under constant scrutiny. The Oscar-winning actor who once stood triumphant on stage now carried the mark of the guilty man. And just 1 year later, a long-dormant civil lawsuit from 2013 suddenly resurfaced, dragging him back into another legal whirlwind. The 2013 hotel lawsuit, The Price of Silence. In early June 2023, the public was shaken again when ABC News and the Los Angeles Times reported that Cuba Gooding Jr. had quietly settled a serious civil lawsuit over an incident dating back nearly a decade at a Manhattan hotel. The plaintiff, identified as Jane Doe to protect her anonymity, claimed she met Gooding at a VIP restaurant in Greenwich Village in 2013. He later invited her for drinks at the Mercer Hotel bar and then up to his room. She alleged that on 2 occasions Gooding crossed the line. The lawsuit sought $6 million in damages for emotional, psychological, and physical harm. On the morning jury selection was set to begin, the very first step of a civil trial, the case suddenly vanished from the calendar. Court records stated simply, "Parties have resolved the matter." The settlement blindsided everyone. The trial had been imminent, with witnesses' testimony and evidence prepared. Yet at the last moment, it ended behind closed doors. The public was once again divided. Some praised Jane Doe for her courage in seeking justice, while others criticized the settlement as proof that Gooding had bought silence. Gooding's lawyer maintained that all allegations were denied, insisting the encounter was consensual. The details of the settlement amount were never disclosed. If the 2013 hotel settlement shocked the public, a new law soon opened an even darker chapter in Cuba Gooding Jr.'s life. The new law, Adult Survivors Act, and fresh lawsuits. The Adult Survivors Act allows adults who were victims of sexual misconduct to file civil lawsuits even if the statute of limitations has long expired. In other words, stories that seemed buried for years could suddenly be brought into court. And immediately, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s name resurfaced. In 2024 and into 2025, at least 2 new women used the law to file lawsuits. Jasmine Abay, who alleged that Gooding kissed her without consent at the Lavo Restaurant Club in Manhattan in 2018. Kelsey Harbert, who claimed Gooding touched her at the Magic Hour rooftop bar near Times Square in 2019. Both cases were filed under the Adult Survivors Act, turning the past into wounds that refused to close. Shocking allegations and public uproar. In her filing, Harbert described her experience with words that sent shivers through the public. "I felt like I was just a piece of meat." The quote spread rapidly across social media, sparking heated debate. For many, this wasn't just an individual case, it was a wake-up call about power silence and justice in Hollywood. Editorials in the Los Angeles Times and Reuters pointed out a grim reality. Every time Hollywood thinks Gooding has faded into the background, a new allegation drags him back into the storm. Each time it seemed the turbulence had passed, another lawsuit was filed. And so, Cuba Gooding Jr.'s image became chained to an endless cycle of litigation. But another shadow was also closing in on him: alcohol parties and the ghosts of scandal. Across multiple legal records, alcohol appears as an inseparable factor in Gooding Jr.'s controversies. When he was arrested in Manhattan in 2019, witnesses said he had been drinking heavily before the incident occurred. At the 2022 trial, the judge ordered him to complete 6 months of alcohol treatment and mandatory behavior counseling conditions tied directly to reducing his charges. For years, the press had repeatedly captured images of Gooding Jr. at well-known bars and clubs, where strong liquor and pounding music seemed to define his lifestyle. In Hollywood, that wasn't unusual. But for an actor who once held the golden statue, it became a detail that left the public deeply disappointed. Parties, the lights and the shadows. In Hollywood, after-parties and private gatherings have always been places where stars converge. Gooding Jr. was no stranger to that world. Many paparazzi photos captured him celebrating through the night, sometimes leaving in a state that gave tabloids plenty of headlines. But in the eyes of the public, those parties no longer represented a star enjoying life. They gradually became symbols of decline spaces, where Gooding Jr. was drawn into murky relationships, whispered rumors, and an ever-growing chain of legal accusations. Like a domino effect, each allegation triggered a new storm. From the Manhattan bar arrest to the civil lawsuits filed under the Adult Survivors Act, Gooding Jr.'s name became increasingly bound to one-word scandal. Several lawsuits described him as being intoxicated out of control. These stories quickly flooded the media, overshadowing every artistic achievement he had once built. Even more shocking, Cuba's name surfaced in one of Hollywood's most notorious controversies. The turmoil escalated when Cuba Gooding Jr. unexpectedly appeared in legal documents and filings connected to rapper Sean Diddy Combs. According to Billboard and Rolling Stone, in a civil lawsuit filed in 2024 by producer Rodney Lil Rod Jones, Gooding Jr. was listed among those present or mentioned at Diddy's parties. The allegations in the case were explosive, filled with details about chaotic party environments, where numerous celebrities were said to be present. Crucially, Gooding Jr. was not criminally charged in the case. However, the mere appearance of his name in the filings was enough to ignite a media firestorm. The public immediately began to wonder, had he been pulled into a web far more complicated than anyone imagined? The complete collapse of a reputation. Even without a final verdict in the new cases, the public has already rendered its judgment. Cuba Gooding Jr. is no longer a star, but a symbol of scandal. From "Show me the money," the legendary line people now coldly twisted into "Show us the truth." He faces a bitter reality: the public no longer cares about money or fame, they want the truth. And perhaps that is the harshest sentence of all: a once brilliant career now buried under a mountain of lawsuits with no end in sight. Before the legal troubles, Cuba Gooding Jr. lived in a world most people could only dream of: a world of hillside mansions, luxury cars, and yachts. His fame opened virtually any door he wished. Wealth and luxury. The spotlight before the storm. According to Celebrity Net Worth, Cuba Gooding Jr. once amassed an estimated fortune of over $12 million. At the heart of this lavish lifestyle was his real estate empire. In 2000, Gooding Jr. purchased a luxury mansion in Pacific Palisades, one of Los Angeles's most exclusive neighborhoods, for around $3.5 million. The sprawling home featured a private pool gym, mini movie theater, and balconies overlooking the Pacific Ocean. By the time it was listed for sale in 2013, the asking price had skyrocketed to nearly $12 million, clear proof of the financial power he once commanded. Beyond that, Gooding Jr. owned a home in Studio City, which he sold in 2009 for $1.4 million, and another in Porter Ranch, sold in 2013 for about $735,000. Each property marked a chapter in his journey, reflecting his path from a Bronx kid to an A-list Hollywood star. Lavish glory, luxury cars, parties, and dream getaways. At the height of his fame, Gooding Jr. embodied wealth itself. He often arrived at red carpets in gleaming sports cars, the kind of brands only true superstars could afford. Hollywood media captured him at extravagant Oscar after-parties, where vintage champagne flowed and lively jazz bands played until dawn. With friends, he spared no expense inviting them on vacations to the Caribbean or Europe getaways drenched in Sunsea, and the unmistakable stamp of a celebrity lifestyle. The risks of that lifestyle. But luxury never comes free. Owning multi-million-dollar estates, high-end cars, and indulging in lavish travel was once a point of pride, but it may now be a burden. Property taxes in Los Angeles are notoriously steep. Add to that the costs of maintenance asset management income taxes and mounting legal fees, and a $12 million fortune can vanish faster than people think. Some analysts were blunt. If the scandals and lawsuits continue, Gooding Jr. will be forced to sell more real estate just to maintain cash flow. Glory meets darkness. He once had it all: money mansions, luxury cars, fame. But now Cuba Gooding Jr. faces the possibility of losing nearly everything. What was once a symbol of triumph could soon stand as evidence of downfall. And with the legal storm still far from over, one question looms large: will his wealth hold, or will it evaporate along with his reputation? If Cuba Gooding Jr. was once a dazzling star on the red carpet behind the family doors, lay a very different story. A story with less glitter, more cracks and fragile moments the world has rarely seen. Private life and family, broken happiness, lingering pain, a marriage full of turmoil. In 1994, as his career was beginning to rise, Gooding Jr. married Sarah Kapfer, his high school sweetheart. Theirs was once seen as a fairy tale romance. Two young lovers who grew up together and then faced the dazzling world of Hollywood side by side. They had 3 children, Spencer, Mason, and Piper. Gooding Jr. often emphasized in interviews that family was his rock amid the chaos of life in the spotlight. But Hollywood is a whirlwind. As he reached his peak with Jerry Maguire, film schedules, parties, and international events began to pull him further from home. In 2014, Sarah Kapfer filed for divorce after 20 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. By 2017, the divorce was finalized. Custody and property were divided. For Gooding Jr., it was a devastating blow, coming just as his legal troubles were beginning. Rumors swirled that after the divorce, Gooding Jr. was seen in a close relationship with Claudine De Niro, the ex-wife of Robert De Niro's son Raphael. Page 6 reported sightings of them together at hotels and social events. However, no evidence ever confirmed the relationship as official or long-term. A father in the shadows. Despite the failed marriage, Gooding Jr. maintained close ties with his children. His eldest, Spencer Gooding, pursued a career in entertainment. Mason tried his hand in sports and creative fields. And Piper, the youngest daughter, remained the one he cherished deeply. In multiple interviews, Gooding Jr. said, "His children were the reason I get up every day." Yet the unending scandals inevitably tested his image as a father. Many wondered, would these controversies leave lasting scars on the family? The pain of losing his father. Cuba Gooding Sr. Long before he became an actor, Gooding Jr. grew up surrounded by music. His father, Cuba Gooding Sr., was the lead singer of the iconic R&B group The Main Ingredient, famous for the hit Everybody Plays the Fool. To Gooding Jr., his father was the greatest inspiration. But in 2017, tragedy struck Cuba. Gooding Sr. was found dead in his car in California at the age of 72. Police concluded it was a natural death linked to heart disease. Gooding Jr. was shattered. He admitted he cried for days, and his father's passing made him feel, "I was no longer a child anymore." It was a wound beyond repair, a personal grief that weighed heavily on him, even as he faced public scandal. On one side, multi-million-dollar mansions, Oscar red carpets, lavish parties. On the other, courtrooms, a painful divorce, and tears at his father's funeral. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s life is a paradox. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows behind the curtain. That contrast has made his story one of the most complex and intriguing in Hollywood. And despite the whirlwind of lawsuits, Cuba Gooding Jr. has not yet abandoned cinema. New film projects and artistic work. He is leading the cast of Above the Break, the directorial debut of young filmmaker Chase Korzep, a project that Variety called a bold move to mark a comeback. In 2024, Gooding Jr. appeared in The Firing Squad, a film inspired by faith and spiritual transformation. The role was widely seen as an attempt to cleanse his image through a serious project with strong humanistic themes. The peak of his return came at the 2025 Cannes Film Festival. There, Gooding Jr. walked the red carpet and reunited with Tom Cruise, his longtime friend from Jerry Maguire. The meeting drew major attention, not only because of their enduring friendship, but also because it reminded the public that Gooding Jr. was once part of Hollywood's golden history. His appearance at Cannes was seen as a signal flare, a sign of his determination to rebuild his career, even as scandals continued to circle. Hollywood's culture and legacy. Cuba Gooding Jr. was once a source of pride for the black community in Hollywood. With Boys in the Hood 1991, he became the voice of a generation. With Jerry Maguire 1996, he stood on the Oscar stage and turned "Show Me the Money" into a pop culture anthem. Yet years of scandals dimmed that brilliance. The pressing question now, will his artistic legacy endure or be buried beneath personal disgrace? Gooding Jr. is not alone in this tragedy. Kevin Spacey, a two-time Oscar winner, is now remembered mostly for accusations. R. Kelly, once an R&B icon, left behind a musical legacy tainted by scandal. Cuba Gooding Jr. risks the same fate, remembered more for controversy than for his roles. From "Show Me the Money" to "Show Me the Truth." Gooding Jr.'s journey is a paradox, from Oscars to the spiral of scandal. On one side, a brilliant legacy. On the other, court files that cast a permanent shadow. Hollywood is ruthless. A handful of accusations can erase 3 decades of work. And for Gooding Jr., his story can be summed up, at least for now, in one sentence. Cuba Gooding Jr. once shouted, "Show me the money," before the whole world. Today, the public is shouting back at him, "Show us the truth."
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and the truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.